Hi, I'm David Swan. I'm the technology editor at the Australian newspaper.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Rubinstein. I'm the CEO at Nuix. Nuix is a leading data and investigative software company which has AI built into all our solutions.
We're here today to talk about AI for good and how artificial intelligence is set to shake up our economy and our society more broadly. We're going to be talking about where to from here when it comes to AI. I might get everyone to introduce themselves, starting Simon down the end.
Simon Burns, I'm a partner in the Tech and IP practice at Gilbert and Tobin.
And Johanna Weaver, I'm the Director of the Tech Policy Design Centre at the Australian National University.
John Henderson, I'm a partner at Airtree Ventures.
Simon Bush, CEO of the Australian Information Industry Association.
Thanks everyone for joining us for the chat. We're talking about if Australia plays a leadership role when it comes to AI. What sorts of guardrails should Australia maybe consider in that, and be as sort of tangible or sort of big picture as you like?
The traditional way to think about guardrails is voluntary guardrails or mandatory guardrails. I think about it a little bit differently and look at it as 3 L's. So law, leadership and liability, which is a scary word, I know, to say in a bunch of tech people. But I think if we look at laws, we've got the existing laws that already apply. So discrimination, negligence, competition law, etc. What new laws do we need for artificial intelligence specific? The leadership piece for me is largely what people would classify as the voluntary aspects or perhaps co-regulatory aspects. So here I'm thinking about ethical frameworks, but also things like procurement policies. And when it comes down to, there's been a lot of studies looking at the impact of ethical frameworks around AI, right? And the message around this is that unless you have the CEO of the company buying in and actively engaging on ethical frameworks, they're going to make no difference. So that's why I put them under the leadership category. And I am a big believer in this space that we also need to look at liability. And this is because when we're looking at harm and the potential harm of these, we need to look at, well, how is that actually going to make the boards and the people who are designing this tech change and adapt the way that they are making the technology.
So we bought a business called Topos Labs out of Boston now more than 2 years ago. And our framework has been that the AI has to be, number one, accessible. So it's not simply, it's actually accessible by the user. They can actually change the probability, but it's owned and managed by the human. The second one is transparency that lots of people talk about. So being able to show how the AI has made a decision. And then the one which is, we've been very clear around the specificity of our AI. So we are more worried about AGI that can learn and make its own decision and therefore break the first 2 rules in reality. And therefore our AI, the specificity of what it solves dictates then how we build it and how we can make it transparent and accessible. The other thing which is interesting from a corporate perspective is we put in our purpose statement, which is being a force for good by finding truth in the digital world. So when I joined Nuix, our purpose statement was finding truth in the digital world, which is exciting, but I think overlaying the purpose of ensuring that it's actually part of our corporate DNA is another layer of self, if you want, regulation. I'm not sure how self-regulation actually plays out in the real world, but in terms of our organisation, certainly as our CEO endorsement there. So we sell to government, large regulators, the legal industry, and so the accessibility and the transparency is required.
So I think we have to be really targeted in understanding what is it that we're trying to address? What is different about AI that requires a new approach, if a new approach is required at all? And I think we really have to, so we're coming back to the guardrails question, what are we guarding against in a world where every bit of tech is going to have AI embedded in it in some shape or form?
I think as a society, we can answer that question quite easily, right? As a society, we don't want to have technology harming humans. As a society, we want to protect our security and our privacy, right? So these are actually harms that society has regulated against since the beginning of regulation, right? And so it's about having a technology neutral approach to the way that we are regulating, so it's agile, recognizing that technology is embedded in everything that we do, and saying, I think the question is not about what is it that we are protecting against. I think it's more of a question about what do we want to use technology for in our society.
I agree with the comment that, yeah, safety, health, fundamental rights, like that EU sort of framework is good, that's well understood. It's how that translates into our existing set of laws, which already do that. And grappling with, well, are we going to regulate AI and have more controls on AI than we have on ourselves? Do we need to do that? That's the sort of nuance which I think is quite challenging, because otherwise we're just setting up a split regime where a certain piece of tech gets regulated different from another piece of tech and gets regulated differently from humans. And I don't think that's the right approach.
I agree. We need to take a tech neutral approach in the way that we regulate 100%.
Government should regulate as a last resort, not as a first resort. Even the Australian government's own guidelines on regulation suggest that. So I think there needs to be, government should regulate where there's economic or societal harm, and that should be the test. And I'm not quite sure what they'd be regulating on AI specifically, and there's been lots of conversation around there's privacy law, there's all sorts of other laws that can deal with perhaps some issues. I'm not saying there shouldn't be some guardrails and some regulations at the right point in time once that harm has been identified and known and understood.
Yeah. Zeroing in on truth and things like trust, for example, how can other businesses and end users of AI technologies sort of trust these AI-enabled outcomes?
Look, I think that truth is super interesting, and we look at, and I go back to Jonah's 3 Ls. I think liability is an interesting one in truth. I think that platforms that promote untruths should have a responsibility at a point to take responsibility for some of those untruths that they're publishing. And the question is, how do you establish at what point? And so I mentioned the Section 230 Act. I think that, and this might be difficult to implement, but I think that when a piece of content is published more than its typical organic reach, then the platform should be responsible for the verification of that content.
For example, should AI be able to tell us if something has been generated by it, for example?
I think what you're going to, David, is transparency, and that is critical to trust, right? Whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's citizen trust and customer trust. So I think the short answer is yes. So generative AI, think ChatGPT, if you know how it's generating, what data it's using, you can then make assessments as to accuracy and validity and whether you should get outside, additional resources and information. Similarly with image generation, I think that's the new frontier. There is some really powerful tools going to be coming to market later this year from some big global players in relation to image manipulation and video manipulation using AI. They are putting watermarks and a little eye on the top right corner that you can click on, and you can then go, well, this is actually being manipulated, and this is how it's being manipulated, and it's almost like a supply chain on that image. So I think this is an area that we need to do more on rather than less.
For what it's worth, from a commercial perspective, we think this is a great opportunity. Like, we're actively looking to back innovators who can do things like AI explainability models to understand how it got to an answer. And similarly, detect deepfakes, detect AI-created content. I think there's a whole new industry that will be created around that, and we can talk about it being a regulatory driver, but I think there will be a commercial need for that as well.
You know, what we should be doing as an economy and a society is turning our minds to areas where AI is enabling a use case that wasn't previously possible. And that's what sort of distinguishes it from other tech. So 5-10 years ago, cloning someone's voice wasn't possible on a 3-second clip. Deepfakes weren't possible in the way they are now. That's where we need to start thinking, is there a gap in terms of the protections that we have in our regulatory environment, and do we need to close that gap?
And I think accountability, so transparency is really important, but what you're talking about as well is looking at accountability. So how do we build accountability, particularly where you have AI or AI systems making decisions? So how are you able, if you question the decision, how are you able to understand the basis on that decision was made? Some people call it explainability. But also, can you appeal that decision? Is there actually someone you can go to and say, no, you've made the wrong decision? I mean, robo-debt, case in point. And so I think that that accountability piece is just as important and closely linked to transparency. And this is not something that is like fanciful, right? That there are standards that exist to help companies go through checklists to say if you're building technology in this space, then do make sure that you have these things built in, complex standards built for technologists. So National Institute for Science and Technology in the US, for example, has just put out these standards.
One area we could use more clarity in is copyright.
Yeah.
And this is an area where the law used to work quite clearly and is now not so clear. I mentioned this summarization company I worked for. That was a machine learning based company in 2012 and 2013. We took long form news articles and we summarized them down to an iPhone screen. And after we'd been doing that for a while, we thought it might be a good idea to take some legal advice on whether that was okay. And the lawyers were fairly clear that a summary of one article was not content that we owned and we needed to pay royalties for that. But then you take the decade later, 2023 LLM version of that, which is some kind of synopsis of the world news based on the LLM having read 100 articles on the same topic and then produced either its own view or some conflagration of those things. How copyright applies to that at this point is unclear. And I think some clarity on that would be very useful because there's a whole bunch of commercial applications being held back by that lack of clarity.
And flipping the lens a little bit to sort of opportunity, I suppose, and the sorts of problems that AI could be tackling. And Jonathan, I might start with you in terms of just, you know, for Nuix, your company specifically, what has AI enabled in terms of the problems you're able to solve?
We've just launched a new platform, which is our Neo platform, and and basically what Nuix does is we ingest massive data sets. We can ingest and read up to 2,000 different file types. Then we process that data, and it's typically unstructured data. And then we've embedded our AI, which is NLP, natural language processing, which contextualizes and understands what we found. And so what it really does is it empowers a human that's looking at data to be much more effective. So for example, we've just released our new data privacy product. What we've done is we've trained our AI to understand, it's a very simple use case, but we've trained the AI to say, what is sensitive data? What is a credit card? What is a social security number? What is a passport? And so when you've had a big cyber breach, the issue is that in our AI, you typically have search strings, which is search for credit cards, search for passport, and it would find a whole lot of false positives. There'd be an email that says, my credit card went missing, and it'd find that and it'd bring that up as a document. And then a human has to then go and review that document. And so what we've done is we've reduced the number of false positives by up to 95%. So we've just enabled a very specific use case. Now, of course, we do a whole lot of other things. We have a forensic investigation tool, so we can train our AI on fraud. There's a fraud triangle, so I can ingest a whole lot of data and search through unstructured data for fraud based on certain specific language traits. For ourselves, again, we've been very cautious as to how we build it because some of our AI is used by lawyers in the legal industry, and so that explainability, right. I'm looking at but that explainability is super important because the lawyers will ask, how did you come up with this decision? Yes. The reality is we still have the human making the decision. We empower the user to actually define the probability and the rating, and that accessibility is important. You do not need a data scientist for that.
I have lots of thoughts on this statement. Let me give you three. I think the societal benefits are immense and the commercial opportunities follow them. I'm particularly excited about the implications for health. If you look at Google MedPalm 2 as an example, you can input a bunch of symptoms and it will give you a range of potential disease conditions. This is like a perfect tool for a doctor to use to make sure that they're current, they're up to date, they're validated by the latest science, and then they can focus more on being sort of empathetic and patient-minded. So I think there's a bunch of diagnostic assistance tools that will just lead to better health outcomes. In developed world where you have access to a doctor, even more exciting is where there's no doctor available. I think it's a little bit like chess in the sense that machine is better than person, but person plus machine is better than both. And I think the sort of that analogy goes across to health. Education is another area that I think will reap huge benefits from this. We're investors in a business called Inquisitive. They're the leading provider of educational resources to primary schools in Australia. Today, they provide great resources for kids that are perfectly tailored to the curriculum, and then a bunch of workflow tools for teachers. But they're generalised to all students. And right now, they're working on personalising those resources to each student based on where they're up to, what they're struggling with, and giving them almost an individualised curriculum. And I think that will lead to wonderful educational outcomes for this country. And then just this morning, I heard a pitch from a company we haven't invested in. They're doing a chatbot for the construction industry. So today you're driving a truck around a construction industry and you don't know how far you can go behind that mining truck in front of you. It's one of those things you have to go and control F some legal contract that's sitting in HQ for. This company's building a voice interface so that the truck driver can just say, hey, how far do I need to be behind that truck? And it can give them like a way to be compliant with the safety regulations. So that's like a really niche example of, again, something that'll lead to sort of positive societal outcomes.
I'm not a expert in artificial intelligence. I'm an expert in law and regulation, but I want to pick up on the education point. So I'm chronically dyslexic. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 25, and I'm a very stubborn person, and I had parents who expected me to do really well at school, and so I was able, through by hook or by crook, to get through. But I think the idea of personalised education, it's a learning difference, not a learning disability, and being able to tailor for learning differences is a really incredibly exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
We had 2 awards that combined AI and virtual reality, one in the aged care sector and one in the healthcare sector, for delivering innovative solutions, tailored solutions to uplift capacity, but also monitor as well, keeping people in home or in regional areas. So there's some really powerful things, tools happening in Australia. It's pretty exciting, actually.
I'm very optimistic about AI, despite some of my comments earlier. I think about, for example, if you go back 40 years and you looked at the large buildings with lots of accountants, and then you give them a spreadsheet and you still have large buildings with lots of accountants. And so what happens to me is, one assumes ceteris paribus that everything stays the same, but actually what happens is the technology enables humans to do a lot more. So I agree. I look at the healthcare sector and think, well, what would it look like in 10 years' time? I have an Aura ring. I'll have a blood glucose monitoring device. I'll have a device that gives me my blood pressure, and that will go to an AI, and that AI will say to the doctor, call Jonathan up because he will be sick in 4 days' time, and I think that empowers a very different, the game changes. So I'm super excited about the opportunity, and I think that's everywhere. I think the AI will be able to do a lot more. There will be definitely disruption in a bunch of industry, and people will need to relearn and figure out how to, if you want, leverage off that AI. But I think it's going to change the world for the good.
To wrap up, we might get from each of our panelists I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, a big and bold prediction for the future of AI. I might start down this end of something different.
Well, I think it'd be big and bold to predict where this is going, other than it's going very, very quickly. You're seeing massive experimentation with early generative AI. If we're just looking at generative AI as a subset of AI. I'm really excited personally with my email inbox for what, I'll pick a product, Office 365, and the fact that it can answer my emails for me, right? It can generate product pictures, it can generate presentations, all from the data that it sits in your computer. So the productivity benefit's quite amazing. But you're seeing co-pilots out there across so many different sectors. And the private LLMs that be able to ingest government, organisational data, develop insight that's going to be really, really powerful. We don't know what that insight is yet, but I'm really excited by it.
Yep.
I think LLMs will reverse a generation-long degradation in educational outcomes. I'm excited. I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I think with personalised assistant tools that help them with their specific needs, we'll get much better outcomes for our kids.
My bold prediction is, first of all, the observation that AI is already here, that it will be here in the future, and the world will keep on moving, keep on turning. Whether it turns for better or for worse is up to us. And I think that's, whether we actively engage to shape it for the good or whether we naively expect it to be good is what will shape the future.
Yeah, I think AI will improve outcomes, many outcomes for many people in society. I think that if we're not careful, the wealth inequality, it'll improve the outcomes for the wealthy and not for the poor. And I think that is a societal impact that we need to think about.
I just pick up on that as well. I think the huge opportunity is to actually get services into the traditionally and systemically underserviced portions of our society. And I think that for me is the key opportunity for AI.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.